This is a very serious issue, this. And we've talked about it off and on for the last couple of years. Even today on commercial television and radio, there were stories about cell phone usage, mobile phone usage by children, by students, by young men and women. We are using cell phones and tablets and laptop devices connected to Wi-Fi hours and hours and hours a day. Children are spending upwards of an hour on social media sites like Facebook. Is it harming us, though? Is it harmful? Now, this is something I've discussed over the years with people like Professor Ola Johansson from Sweden. I've talked to many activists who want to get this subject on the agenda on national and local news, but in vain. They can't get it discussed. A lot of people have expressed real concern about the move from fourth generation to fifth generation technology, 5G. We're seeing, or we will be seeing in the coming weeks and months, the rolling out of that, the paving the way for that, and these antennas going up. Now, my guest this hour is an incredibly interesting man. Got in touch with him last week and asked him to come on the programme to talk about this. He is a verifiable expert in this subject. He is a professor of biology at Washington State University. Molecular biology, I should say. And I came across him because he's appeared in several documentaries and he gave several talks in Europe, all of which are available on YouTube, and they are profoundly interesting and disturbing at the same time. Let's welcome to the programme from Washington State, Dr. Martin Pall. Martin, welcome to the programme. How are you?
I'm just fine, thanks. Glad to be with you.
Well, thanks for coming on. I imagine it's a busy time for you with the new year, the new university year, of course. You've been studying this particular subject. You've been looking at this for more than 2 decades, as far as I can tell. What piqued your interest in it? How did you get interested in this field of research, the effects of electromagnetic fields on human cells? How did you get into it?
Well, I was actually working on chemical effects in medicine. And more recently, so actually my involvement in the electromagnetic fields, EMFs, is more recent than that. I published my first paper on it in 2013, which has generated a huge amount of interest, and that's, I've been running ever since. So, and the more I learn, the more horrified I become. There's been evidence on health impacts going back at least to the 1950s that has been very substantial and was recognized, in fact, in 3 different U.S. government reports back in the old days before the industry propaganda came in and started dominating everything. We recognized all this stuff. And since then, fortunately, other countries have taken up the slack in terms of research, and things are still progressing in terms of our understanding at a rapid rate. But the politicians have been basically dominated by the industry propaganda, and that's where we are.
That answers the next question, because you talked about evidence going back as far as the 50s, and that there was governmental knowledge about it. Why then, at that stage, weren't companies who used the technology, why weren't they compelled, Martin, to make it safe? Why not?
Well, I guess if you've got enough money to dominate everything, you can do almost anything you want, and that's the sad state of our political world. Let's talk about the safety guidelines.
Yes.
Okay, because the U.S. and international safety guidelines, and this is the same thing is true in the U.K. as well as in most of the EU and in the U.S. and many other parts of the world, are based only on heating effects. They're based on the assumption that the only thing these EMFs can do is to heat things. And therefore, if heating is, if you don't have much heating, you don't have to worry about it. That's the argument. And this, again, was known to be false going back all the way to the 1950s. There were extraordinary numbers of studies which clearly showed it was false. What was true was that we didn't understand how these non-thermal effects were produced. There were a number of theories about them, but we really didn't know, what the mechanism was. And this is where I got involved. I stumbled upon some findings in the literature that showed that the EMFs work by, and I apologize for the complexities of this, by activating what are called voltage-gated calcium channels. And these are channels in the membrane that surrounds our cells, what's called the plasma membrane. And when they're activated, they open up, and you get huge amounts of calcium that flow into the cell. And the excess calcium in the cell, so normally calcium levels are maintained very low in the cells, except for very short time periods. But when you open up these channels, you get huge amounts of calcium. It's the excess calcium that produces all the effects, or almost all of it anyway. So so we know how it works, and we know why these channels are so incredibly sensitive to the EMFs, and why they get activated at very, very low intensities. And this then leads to all the different effects, and there are huge numbers of them, and they are very concerning.
Before we talk about the effects, this is fascinating and it's important, and you won't be surprised to learn that in advance of you coming on, Martin, I had a lot of correspondence from people who wanted me to put questions to you, and there are too many to get into today in the conversation we will have today. Definitely, the effects is the most important thing, and that's why you're here, and to talk about 5G. People want to know, is it possible to manufacture these devices in a way that prevents the radiation leaking, coming into contact with us and flooding our cells with the calcium that you described there? Can they be made safely?
Well, they can be made much more safely than we're doing, but that's a different question from can they be made safely?
Yeah.
Can they be made safe? And I think, there are inherent problems with wireless devices, because the wireless devices send out these EMFs all over the place, and so they impact our bodies when we get impacted by it. The one other thing that's very important for people to understand is the following. It's been known for many, many years, and the first review that was written on this was published back in 1965, that pulsed EMFs that pulse up and down a lot, and are in most cases much more biologically active and therefore much more hazardous than non-pulsed EMFs, even when they have the same amount of heating that's produced. And so, and every single wireless communication device communicates via pulsations. And so what that means is they're potentially, and I believe actually, much more dangerous as a consequence. And the other thing which comes into this is the smarter the devices are, the more they pulse. So that tells you something very profound. And we keep going. Things get worse and worse and worse. And the literature on this is very well documented. As I say, the first review on it was published back in 1965, and still the case that the industry denies all this stuff. The regulatory agencies pay no attention to it, and so forth. So we're in deep trouble.
We're in deep trouble. And can I go back to something you said a few minutes ago before we start getting into the human health implications of the technology? You said that since 2013, you said you've been on the run ever since. Now, one of the things I worry about, and I mean, I don't know you, it's the first time we've met, but I have seen over the years, not always in the field of molecular biology, not always in the field of politics, but in many different fields, when academics have broken free and have said, well, look, something needs to be done, we need to talk about this, and the establishment doesn't like it. It has often had consequences for the career of the academic, negative consequences. Now, when you say you've been on the run ever since, is that what you mean? Have you had to fight off, attacks on your character, on your credibility since you started talking about this?
Okay, so first of all, you need to know something. I am, I'm Professor Emeritus. Okay.
Yeah.
So I am not. I'm not employed by the university. I'm quote unquote retired. And so, in that sense, there are things that other people have to worry about that I don't have to worry about.
Great.
But having, but you raised the question. I mean, basically, every single prominent scientist who's been working on EMF effects has been attacked by this multi-trillion-dollar industry. And so right now I'm in the I'm in the sights.
You're in the crosshairs.
And I know that. And this is relatively recent. I don't think they knew how to take me on. I still don't think they know how to take me on. But when you've got these kind of forces arrayed against you, you have to be very concerned about it.
One of the things that was said to me today was that this is a relatively recent phenomenon. Well, of course it isn't. The technology's been around for years. But I suppose, Martin, it's really only in the last 3 decades that we've seen cell phone towers, these, enabling devices.
It's much more recent than that, even.
Go on, because
I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah, most of this stuff, we've had huge increases in exposures, just even within the last 5-10 years. And 15 years ago, exposures were much lower than they are now. And the problem we have, and one of the problems is, back in the era around in the 1970s, typically, there were quite a number of very good occupational exposure studies that had been done at that time. And you could do them because there weren't a lot of exposures out in the environment. So if somebody was exposed as a consequence of their occupation, you knew what the exposure was. You knew that if they were in a stable environment in the workplace, that they were going to be exposed to the same thing over long time periods, and you could study what the effects were. And there were quite a number of studies of that sort. It's impossible to do studies like that now because we're exposed to so many different things. And you just walk around, you move from one place to another, your exposures can be dramatically changed. And so a lot of the studies that were done, that I look at are these really old studies because some of them are very good and some of them cannot be replicated now. It's impossible.
We hear all the time. I'm living in a big city. It's a big metropolitan city, Manchester. And we often hear about increases in sleeping difficulties. We get studies all the time in the press about how insomnia is on the rise, about how various debilitating illnesses are on the rise. And when those come up, and this is an independent radio show with a big audience, but it is independent, I will get listeners saying, well, there's no doubt in my mind that it is connected in some way to the prevalence of cell phone towers and EMF. Is there evidence? I know you said it's difficult now to do studies because of everything else, but can we point to, is there an obvious, elephant in the room that certain types of conditions are on the increase in the young, particularly in the young, that we can say coincided with the very recent, appearance of the cell phone towers? Can we say that? Because we're getting in now to the area of what type of effects does this technology have on people. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So there really there are at least 2 major types of effects that of the general sort that you raise, and they're each of them I think are very serious. There are very large numbers of neurological and neuropsychiatric effects which are clearly caused by the EMFs. And we're not just talking about cell phone towers, we're not talking just about cell phones, we're not just talking about Wi-Fi, we're talking about all kinds of different things producing similar effects on the nervous system. And these have been studied both in humans and in animals. In animals, you see that there are effects on the structure of the brain, that become more and more severe with time of exposures to a particular type of radiation. And to the point where things get absolutely extraordinarily damaged over time. So they start out slowly, but they develop and they become more and more severe. And the occupational exposure studies that were done in humans showed the same pattern. And as they become, and initially, if you just, if you have a modest effect and you stop exposing, which of course is very difficult to do now, things went back to normal over time. This was shown in animals and it was shown in humans. When they become more and more severe, they become irreversible. So that if you just stop exposing, there's still severe damage that's done. So all of this is known, and let me just say, with regard to the what I call the neurological and neuropsychiatric effects. And I published one paper on this. There are quite a number of other papers that have been published on it. What you see are the same things that people complain about all the time here. You see, I can't sleep, I'm tired all the time, I can't concentrate, I'm depressed, my memory doesn't work, I'm anxious, et cetera, et cetera. All these things that people complain about all the time, we know are caused by the EMFs. And we actually know why they're caused by the EMF. So most of it is because the nervous system is extraordinarily sensitive to the effect of the EMFs. It's from the animal studies, it was shown that the nervous system is the most sensitive organ in the entire body, followed by the heart and the testis, interestingly. And you have effects that relate to all three of those organs, but you also get many effects from other things as well. So so we know all this, and of course, and let me just say, everything I say, the industry will claim is not true. So I guarantee that they will say that. So,
but they won't talk to anybody, Martin. It's interesting you say that. Any half-baked journalist will seek out the other side, and I've been talking about this for years, and I've contacted the producers of phones. I know it's not exclusively a phone issue, and it's very good that you bring that up, but I've contacted the mobile phone, cell phone manufacturers countless times and asked them to provide somebody to answer the claims made by learned academics like yourself, and you are very lucky if you get an answer. Ordinarily you're ignored. Every now and then you get an answer where they might send you some press release from years ago saying that everything is hunky-dory, don't worry about it. So you can't get the other side of it because they don't want to talk.
That's right. Well, they will only talk in a controlled environment where they can control, the situation. And they do that, of course, because they know they'll lose in a real debate. They don't have any science, so that's what they do. And the sad fact is that the media have been almost completely defunct in this area, and there have been a few exceptions, but they are very, very few. And yet, there have been, and I have a list of 33 different scientific documents that have been written up by scientists and physicians about this from 2002 to the present, and there are another 2 right now that are being circulated on specifically on 5G. So we'll be up to 35. And so these things have been running, roughly 2 a year during that whole time period, and they're still going. And people don't pay attention to this. So the scientists, say one thing, and then it just gets ignored. And this has happened over and over and over again during that entire time period.
As a man of science and a man of experiments and a man of integrity, you do an experiment and you report the results of that, even if the results were undesired. You might have wanted a different result, but you're a man of science and you report what you find. How life-changing has it been for you, noticing how the media works hard to suppress this, how political parties and leaders, collude to suppress this? I mean, that must be life-changing for somebody like you. the realization of?
Well, so let me just say, all of the experiments and studies that I look at are not my own. Okay, what I've been doing is pulling things out of the literature and trying to make sense out of them and trying to understand how they fit with other things that are done by other scientists. And what you find is you find patterns of effects, and that's what really tells you what is very well documented and what's not. And I think that so it's not my data that's involved. I was when I was when I had a laboratory and I had research going on. Obviously, I know how to do experiments. I know how to interpret them. I know what kind of things can go wrong when you do them. And so I have the kind of expertise that you need to analyze other people's data as well as my own. And so that's been very important. Another thing that's been very important, I got my bachelor's degree in physics. I got my PhD in biochemistry and genetics, both from world-class institutions. And so I have the kind of scientific background that you need to deal with something, because this involves the physics as well as the biology and the chemistry.
Well, I just mentioned.
I'm not sure I answered your question.
No, you did. No, you answered the question. I'm happy with that. And you did mention 5G, which is a massive concern to listeners to this program, who believe that when this has arrived, when it's landed in our cities and towns, that the consequences are going to be catastrophic. And sometimes you worry about hyperbole and you worry about exaggerating. But it's not an exaggeration to say that 5G technology is basically going to change us. Humanity is going to change physically. Is it fair to say that?
I think it's much worse than that.
How?
Well, okay, you have to understand how what 5G is. And why one? So let me just say, first of all, that the plan is to put out tens of millions of these 5G antennae, all such that they will be very close to almost every place you can go. So it'll be almost virtually impossible to avoid these exposures, because they're going to be all over the place, and they will have, I believe, very powerful impacts. What is true is that there has been not one single biological safety test on genuine 5G. And so they're planning to put out tens of millions of these without even doing one biological safety test.
Not one.
And that in and of itself, says, hey, this is totally insane. But I think there are very powerful reasons to think that 5G will be extraordinarily dangerous. And so in order to look at that, you have to compare 5G with the conventional exposures that we are already exposed to, and how they differ, and why I think that they're going to be very, very dangerous. The first thing is that 5G is going to be what they call millimeter wave, so it's much higher frequency than the microwaves that most of the things we're being exposed to. Okay, that turns out to be very important for several reasons. But let me go into a second thing, and that is 5G is supposed to be something that will communicate huge amounts of information in every second, which and the way it will do that is by being very, very highly pulsed. And I said before, the pulsations make these much more dangerous. We don't know how dangerous 5G is going to be because nobody's looked at it. What they have done a little bit is there has been some study done on these millimeter wave frequencies, but as far as I can tell, they're only completely unpulsed. So they're very, very different from what genuine 5G is going to be. And even those studies are chilling. That is, they suggest that the millimeter waves are in fact quite dangerous. So I think it's going. I mean, my prediction, and so let me just say one other thing about this, and I apologize for the complexity.
Not at all. It's very good. You're doing a great job, Martin. Go ahead of explaining it.
Yeah. The way in which, okay, so I talked about the activation of these voltage-gated calcium channels. I abbreviate them VGCCs. They have a structure in them, which is called the voltage sensor, which has a whole bunch of charges on it, and it's the forces on those charges which produce the opening of the channel. Okay, so it's an electrical effect, and those charges, as it turns out from their structure and their location, are extraordinarily sensitive to these to the forces. And I estimate that the forces on this voltage sensor are something like 7.2 million times stronger than on singly charged groups that are in the watery parts of our bodies, which is where most of them are. So you're talking about huge, powerful forces, and it turns out that the wavelength of these millimeter wave things get absorbed very rapidly by materials, both materials in our bodies and materials in buildings and things, which is why they need to put them all over the place and use very high power on there so that it'll penetrate, so we can do 5G in all kinds of buildings, and we can access it. And so the way in which the EMFs interact with things is through the charged groups that they're interacting with. So my prediction is the forces on the voltage sensor are going to be extraordinarily strong from the 5G wavelength. And then when you put in all these pulsations, which make them vastly stronger, we're going to be in horrible shape. That's my prediction. Now, one can say, well, it's a prediction, maybe it's wrong. Well, I don't think so, but maybe it is. And the only way to look at that is to do real biological testing, and that's, of course, what the industry and the regulatory authorities are specifically avoiding doing. So that's the world we live in. And my prediction is that we will have absolutely powerful effects on us from 5G, that they will be extraordinarily rapid, and that they will have powerful impacts not only on our nervous system, on our reproductive systems, on our hormones, on the DNA of our cells. All of these we know are impacted by the EMFs. They may well have large effects on our hearts as well, and on many other parts of the body. I think it's going to be an absolutely world-class disaster, not only for humans, but an ecological disaster all over the place.
So we're looking at, sorry Martin to interrupt, we're looking at a spike in cancers, we're looking at a rise in all sorts of debilitating diseases. As far as the nervous system goes, let me just remind our listeners, by the way, Dr. Martin Pall, Professor Emeritus, Washington State University, retired, a man who spent many years studying the effects of chemicals on the body, on our cellular structure. Martin talked about that. In recent years, he's begun to look into the effects of non-ionizing radiation, EMFs, on our bodies. He's discovered some startling things. His integrity is unquestionable. Remarkable to have him on the program speaking about this. We're now talking about 5G, and Martin believes that we will see profound effects on human life, on animal life, maybe plant life on this planet. How will we see, as far as the nervous system goes, how will it manifest? What types of illnesses should we expect to see become more common, Martin?
Well, we talked about the neurological, neuropsychiatric effects before. There's also reason to think that the EMFs have strong roles in the causation of both ADHD and autism. And there we're talking mainly about the EMFs that are involved in where either the fetus is involved, or the young baby shortly after birth. So we're talking about what's called the perinatal period, the period before and after birth, that there are impacts on the formation of the synapses in the brain. And so that's a period when there's a huge amount of structuring of the brain where the synapses are formed, in which one neuron sort of connects with another. So a typical neuron in the brain has about 1,000 synapses. So there are all kinds of different processes, events that are occurring. They have to occur more or less in the proper way, or the brain function is severely impacted. And I believe that that's exactly what's being disrupted in autism, and that the EMFs are causing it, basically because we talked about calcium before. There are 4 mechanisms that are known to be involved in the formation of these synapses. Each of them are regulated by the calcium levels in the cell. So you got too much calcium in the cell, you're going to mess them up. And I think that's the primary mechanism. There are also chemical effects, by the way, that can also work through calcium, but I think the EMFs are probably the more important of the two. So we may well have a gigantic. We already have a gigantic epidemic of autism, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
It has huge impacts. And it could well be that, instead of having 1 in 38 births being autism child, it could go up to, something approaching 100% from this huge increase in radiation, unless pregnant women are protected from it and the babies after birth are protected from it. So there are huge problems.
Let me ask you a quick question, Martin. My apologies for interrupting, because we've got about 5 minutes left, and thanks for your time today. I say that sincerely, by the way. I'm glad that I found you, and our audience is genuinely thrilled, even though this is very strong stuff and it's scary stuff. They're happy that somebody is talking about it, because people are asking questions. I believe a lot more people are talking about this and asking questions than maybe people realise. Some of our listeners are asking me to put to you, you might want to answer this, you might not. They're saying that there was a time when, and I'm 43 years old now, but when I was a baby, I was vaccinated against polio and I was vaccinated against TB. There are listeners who are saying that these days, particularly in the UK, I can't speak for the United States, by the time a baby is 3 or 4, he or she might have had 14 or 15 different vaccinations. Now, I'm not going all conspiracy theory, but could that have some effect? Could that, mixed in with our exposure to EMFs, could that be, some sort of cause or some sort of reason as well where we are more unhealthy, why we are seeing more autism? What do you think?
Well, I think, so I said before, I think there are chemical effects that come into it, and some of those chemicals are in the vaccines. So I think it's quite possible that that's true. I don't think that the vaccines are the predominant cause of autism, but that doesn't mean that. And people have said, that this has been a very controversial area, as I'm sure you know. But I don't. That doesn't mean that there's no role, and it's very difficult to prove safety. It's almost impossible to prove safety. In fact, in a broader environment. So this could well be something that has a significant role, but not the predominant role. Let me just say one other thing, since we don't have much time. One of my biggest concerns, has to do with reproduction. I think that we will see a crash in reproduction pretty much to zero.
To zero?
And to zero, yeah. And this has been shown in an animal study that was done over 20 years ago, that exposures well within our safety guidelines can do that in mice. I think we may be seeing this in 3 countries in East Asia, as that it's starting already. These are the 3 countries I'm talking about are Singapore, Macau, which really isn't a country, and South Korea. Those three countries have three of the lowest birth rates already in the world, down well below 60% of replacement levels.
Wow.
And each of them had a major drop in reproduction between 2016 and 2017. And the drop in reproduction in South Korea has been extended into the first half of 2018. So we're seeing big effects there. Now, we don't know for certain that those are caused by the EMFs, but we do know the EMFs can cause these kinds of problems in animals, and they do affect human reproduction as well. And so, so we have all this stuff sort of pointing in this direction, and what we're doing is just totally insane.
Martin, it's not unreasonable to ask this question. Again, it might sound like a tinfoil hat question, no pun intended. But if the people or the institutions responsible for the technology, if they know, and I believe they do know, they know what you know, they know that it has an impact on fertility, it's not unreasonable to ask, even though it sounds crazy, it's not unreasonable to ask, could that be a desired outcome or a desired impact from this technology? I mean, we're talking James Bond supervillains here. It might sound crazy, but if they know about it, what do you think?
I've been asked that several times, quite a number of times actually. I don't know. What I would say is that I think what we're looking at, I mean, when you look at the sum total of the things that we're looking at, the three things that worry me the most are the neurological and neuropsychiatric effects we talked about. The reproductive effects, which I think we may well see a crash essentially to zero. And if it behaves the way it did in the mice, this will be an irreversible crash. Now, so what that tells you, and the third thing that I'm most concerned about is the mutational effects in the germline. We may have gigantic numbers of mutant babies being born, to the extent that any babies are being born. Those are all things that are highly plausible. The first two, I think we have good reason to think are pretty far along. The third, I don't have any good data on. I don't know how far along we are. But I can see a situation where when 5G comes in, we'll have a crash in our collective brain function, which will lead essentially to complete and utter chaos. Because, our societies are functioning in terms of our brain functions. We start having massive, crashes in our brain function. We are, this be extraordinarily destructive. I can see the reproduction going to zero, in which case what happens when a society has no future.
Question for you, last one, and I'd like you to keep the program in mind in the near future when you've got more to say and when there's information that needs to be widely disseminated. I'd appreciate you coming back on because it's important, and I'm glad that you came on, Martin. I don't want to patronise you. I wouldn't dream of it. Question that's come in, and it's about military application. People wonder, can this technology be weaponized? Do you think, has it been weaponized? Could it be used against populations, Martin? Final question for today.
Oh, I think my understanding, and this is all stuff that's more by way of rumor than data, because of course everything is classified, is that the U.S., Canada, the U.K., and Russia have all had, programs for weaponizing microwave weapons. Now, how far they've gone, I don't know. But I don't have any doubt that, and as you may know, the recent New York Times article has argued, and I think they're absolutely right about that the attacks on U.S. Diplomatic personnel in Cuba and in China were caused by microwave weapons, and I think that's right. I think we know that the microwaves produce those kinds of effects that we're seeing in those people. So that's so I think it's very plausible, and I guess that's all I can say.
It takes a lot of courage, I think, even though you might say, I'm a Professor Emeritus and I am retired, Richie. It still takes enormous courage to speak out about this stuff and subject yourself to criticism and ridicule. I think you're terrific, really. I'm glad that I came across you. I did a show last week on a documentary about the effects of this, and you came up, and I was glad to get in touch with you, because people need to hear this, and they then need to make a decision on what they're going to do with that information. Please do keep us in mind when you've got more to say, and come back, Martin. I'd be glad to have you back, and I really appreciate your time today. I mean that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for that. That was Dr. Martin Pall, PhD, Professor Emeritus at Washington State University. And he was live from Washington State today, talking about why, after spending years investigating the effects of chemicals on our cellular structure, why in 2013 then he began to learn and understand that the effects of microwave radiation, EMF, non-ionizing radiation on our body had been widely known since the 50s, what it was doing to our bodies and what it would continue to do if unchecked. And he's been speaking and writing about that for a few years. And it's profound stuff there. You heard Martin say clearly that reproduction will be reduced to zero, in his opinion, after the tens of millions of 5G antennae, because globally it will be tens of millions, not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. And he reckons that it's going to have catastrophic consequences for human reproduction, but also it's going to have catastrophic consequences for our brains and how our brains work and operate. And that's not fear-mongering. This guy, and this is the reason I brought him on, even though we discussed this last week, is because this is a man whose work has been peer-reviewed for years. His work on chemical effects on the body, peer-reviewed and lauded. Won various medals, won award after award after award for his work on microbiology, on cellular biology, and the harmful effects of chemicals on it. This man is coming out saying now that what's coming down the line, and there isn't anything we can do about that. You're a defeatist, Richie. You're a whinger and you're a defeatist. No, I'm not. Nothing is going to stop this. It's coming. It'll be here next year in this country. And this is what he's telling us. And that's about all we have time for today. Big shout out to Mark Collett for coming on the programme in the first hour. Enjoyed listening to Mark again. And Dr. Martin Pall, that's Pall, PhD. You heard him there discussing why he believes that the technology is going to be a game changer for humankind, for animal kind on this planet in the very, very, very near future. There you go. Right, that's it. Thanks for listening to it. Thanks for listening to him. Do share that widely when it appears on podcast real soon. It'll be on YouTube as well in around about 3 hours' time. It will appear, the entire programme, minus the music, which I think I played one song tonight, on YouTube as well. Thanks for listening to the show. We'll do it all again tomorrow at 5 p.m. UK time. The new starting time for the programme, by the way, 5 p.m. UK time on Fab Radio 2 in Manchester, triggerwarning.tv, the Cogent Radio app, the TuneIn app, and of course richieallen.co.uk. Let me give a plug. Coming up at 10:30 tonight on the Cogent Radio app, on triggerwarning.tv, Hayden Hewitt and Graham will present a Trigger Warning show where they'll be talking about geopolitical events, some of the big news stories of the day, and they will be giving you a different perspective to that which you would get on commercial radio. That's Hayden Hewitt and Graham tonight at 10:30. That's UK time on triggerwarning.tv and the Cogent Radio app. That programme has flown by. Thanks for listening to it. Look after yourselves and one another. Leaving you with an oldie from Midnight Oil. See you tomorrow then. Bye for now. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Thanks for listening. Bye now.